Extraordinary stories coming out of Gaza. We'll get to that in a little while, but we know about human shields. The hostages are human shields. Well, new evidence has emerged that Hamas killers are literally using children as human shields, holding them in front of themselves to take the bullets.
As they shoot.
Disgusting, disgusting. But back here, Ella, 80% of British Jews feel less safe here than before Hamas's attacks on Israel, with more than a quarter saying that they've faced anti-Semitic abuse. I mean, this is really concerning and worrying to me. I mean, there are fewer than 300,000 Jews in this country. A lot of them live around where I do in North London. They're British people. Why are they receiving so much prejudice and abuse?
Well, it's the one form of racism and harassment and abuse that has for a long time gone unspoken about and sort of dismissed as not as important. I mean, obviously things have heightened since October the 7th and escalated, but I think it's really important to point out that anti-Semitism has been a growing problem for much longer than before this autumn. Where I live up the road in Stamford Hill, Jewish schools have had security guards at their doors for years, actually. Now it's been there's been in the news over the last few years, altercations where people have been beating up young Jewish guys who are, wearing things that identify them as Jewish. There was a scene on Oxford Street where I think a lot of people were shocked to know that it was happening somewhere so public and open. But this has been a reality for British Jews for quite some time. And I think it's, there are certain movements now since October the 7th of solidarity campaigns with Jews for people who aren't Jewish that are, trying to make real the sentiment that I think a lot of people feel, despite the sort of horror that's happening, which is that their fight is our fight, a sense of solidarity against anti-Semitism, and, a desire to make good on the promise, the never again promise, which is repeated by people all the time in a kind of throwaway way. But I think if we're serious about not allowing anti-Semitism to come to horrendous conclusions in this country, then we need to get serious about calling it out and stamping it out.
I mean, is this why, essentially, this sort of the trope, and I always think that anti-Semitism has a stem in that sort of hard left jealousy, bitterness and envy, because they're seen as a very successful nation and people and all the tropes that come with that. Is this why, essentially, Hamas's reputation isn't the same as the reputation of ISIS? They aren't, regarded as a hateful terrorist organisation by most of the world, despite committing horrific atrocities, despite essentially holding children as shields and shooting while doing so, shooting dead people trying to flee to safety in Gaza because they want the civilians to become casualty figures. Is it because that, their victim was Israel, that somehow that's what's made them?
I think in order to understand anti-Semitism today, you have to know what it's made up of, which is that it's this kind of heady mix of three things. There's the classic old far right, Jew-hating people, of which there are plenty left. I mean, the Polish MP has just been broken news for blowing out a menorah with a fire extinguisher. So, these people still exist, and that's a section of it. Then there is a sort of Islamist section of it, which there's a lot of Islamist sentiment in this country, which we haven't got serious about, as we know with terror attacks that have happened recently. That feeds into it. There's a kind of Jew hatred in that. And then there is a sort of far left willful blindness to anti-Semitism, which we saw throughout the Corbyn era, but also we've seen in response to the Hamas attacks. This unwillingness to put your foot down on the side of Jews because you don't want to upset Palestinians or you don't want to upset liberation movements. And I think the really important thing that people keep forgetting is that Hamas is obviously an enemy of Jews, but it's also an enemy of Palestinians. It killed all its opposition. It has constantly undermined and undercut services for people in the area. It's not serious about running. It's got no interest in democracy. It's got no interest in ceasefire. It's got no interest in preserving life. Its number one aim, or at least one right up there on its priority list, is to wipe out Jews. Yeah. How is that beneficial for a people? I think Palestinian self-determination is extremely important. I want to have all those conversations. I don't understand why people think the only option for that is Hamas.
Yeah, indeed.